Hey guys, my name is Mike Loria, and for those of you who I haven't had the pleasure of meeting yet, I am one of the emergency medicine interns, and this is my mini teach on a topic near and dear to my heart, and that is situation awareness. Specifically, how I think we can take lessons from other high risk occupations and apply them to some of our higher risk procedures in emergency medicine. What I want you to walk away with from this talk is essentially three things. First, what is situation awareness, and specifically how we conceptualize this in the human factors world. Two, how I think we can develop it by actually teaching people behaviors that promote situation awareness. And three, how we can essentially make these behaviors automatic or turn them into habits. And I started thinking about this when I was a young PJ. It was my first deployment in Iraq. We were hoisting a patient off a rooftop into a helicopter. And I had prepped the patient. Everything was set to go with the Stokes litter. We called in the helicopter. We dropped down the hoist, hooked up the hoist to the Stokes litter, and I was actually about to look up at the flight engineer and give him the hand and arm signal to start hoisting the patient. When all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I see one of my buddies run up to me. He reaches behind me and flips something off my back, and I see this shiny object flash in front of my face. And I look down, and it was actually the hoist cable. So the hoist cable was wrapped around my neck. And had it not been for my buddy, that hoist cable probably would have taken my head off like a cheese wire. And I wouldn't be here today to talk to you guys about this. So I realized that I had completely lost situation awareness, and it almost cost me my life. Now, when most people think about situation awareness, they think it's just about paying attention. And that think reflects the superficial nature in which this topic has been discussed in medicine in particular. And it's actually much more complex than that. We've had a lot of cognitive scientists and psychologists investigate this. And as it turns out, it's actually a three-step process. So the first step, the most elementary step, is just noticing or picking up on changes in the environment. And that leads to the cognitive processing or comprehension step, where our brain actually puts the pieces of the puzzle together and figures out what's going on. And from there, we can actually prognosticate. We project what would happen if this trajectory continues. And then we make adjustments based on that prediction. Now, it was actually kind of surprising when I started doing the research on this topic, and actually quite shocking. If you look at a lot of high-risk occupations, from NASA to the nuclear power industry, the aviation industry, and you review all of their major accidents and disasters going back the past half century, to the 1950s, what's very interesting is you see this pattern of two major things that seem to contribute to almost every single disaster or accident. One, not surprisingly, is communication or lack thereof, and the second is loss of situational awareness. I think this is also a problem because when we discuss it in medicine in particular, we discuss it in a very superficial nature. And the way we teach it is, hey, you just got to keep your eyes open. You just got to look out around you. Keep an eye on what's going on in the resuscitation room to your left and to your right. And that's generally not very helpful. But I think we can do a much better job. I think this gives us an opportunity to improve the way we do certain procedures. And in particular, what I'll do is I'll use airway management as sort of an example of what I'm talking about here. So first, I think we can build active systems that promote awareness. Now, I'll take another example from the military. In combat, when we're flying and we're coming into an LZ, the pilot will call out Angel 15, 50 and 50. That means our aircraft is about 50 feet off the ground and we're going about 50 knots. Now, without being prompted, immediately the gunner in the left seat calls out clear left. The gunner or flight engineer in the right seat calls out clear right, and who's ever in the back, whatever crew member, usually a pararescueman, will look behind the aircraft at the tail and then up and down toward the ground and clear out, call back, or clear back. This lets everybody in the aircraft know that you're clear 360 degrees around the aircraft. So everybody completes a scan of their area and then lets everybody else know that it's clear. In medicine, I think the application of this is what I call developing the resuscitation circle of awareness. And some of our colleagues overseas are already experimenting with this. So the doctor paramedic teams that fly for the Sydney HEMS program in New South Wales, Australia, when they go to RSI a patient, the physician or whoever's doing the primary laryngoscopy will have all of their attention focused on the airway. Their partner, on the other hand, will perform a systematic scan of the area, looking at the patient, looking at the monitor, pulse ox, heart rate, and blood pressure, and then looking at the other team members, in particular the laryngoscopist, to make sure they don't need any other additional airway assistance at that time. Then they do a quick 360-degree scan of the area to make sure that the environment around them hasn't changed and is set up appropriately to facilitate what they want to do. Now, what we need to do is take that behavior, that scanning system, and transform it into a habit. So, why are habits important? Habits are really powerful things. We've really learned this. A lot of this literature has come from the world of substance abuse and addiction science, but we learned that they're very powerful things. They tap into a very deep, hardwired reward circuitry in our brain and essentially become unconscious habits. We do them almost automatically without thinking. And that's kind of important for us because they will be very resilient and they will maintain themselves even when we're stressed out. We'll see people be able to effectively perform things that have become habits. Now, we can take that science and we can actually apply it to help build productive habits, habits that I think will help us become more aware during very dynamic resuscitations and sort of high-risk procedures in particular. So getting back to that airway example, we start out with a cue. The cue might be the completion of the airway checklist, or perhaps the nurse saying that the drugs are in, whatever. That would trigger the person who's assisting the laryngoscopist, whether that's a nurse or a physician, it doesn't really matter. But that particular event acts as a trigger. And that trigger kicks off the situation awareness behavior. In this case, the specific action sequence of checking out or scanning the patient, looking at the monitor, and looking back at the person performing the intubation. Looking at the patient, looking at the monitor, looking at the person performing the intubation. This allows you to jump back and forth between the critical aspects or critical components involved in the airway procedure and will alert the person performing the scan to changes before they actually happen and not getting sucked in or tunnel visioned in on the airway itself. Now, the reward component of that is another piece of the puzzle. As it turns out, when you feel good, when you receive some sort of reward from a particular behavior, then it's ingrained very, very well. And in this case, it's essentially the reward of having some semblance of control or having being able to be alerted early if there's a particular problem. Also, as it turns out, just actively performing a behavior as opposed to standing by also makes us feel pretty good, especially in certain stressful situations. So this completes what we call the reward or the habit loop, a cue that initiates a routine that is hammered into our brain by a particular reward. Now, the other thing we need is actually a lot of repetition. So we need to do this situation awareness behavior over and over again in order to really ingrain it. Now, we don't know exactly at what point this happens, but at a certain point, that becomes essentially, that behavior becomes automatic. It becomes a habit. We're not sure exactly where that is. In some cases, research has showed us that if you wanted people to do a very simple behavior, like drink a glass of water with every meal, it takes about 60 days. More complex behaviors can take much longer, up to 100, 200 days or longer. So we're not sure exactly how long it takes, but we know it takes repetition. Now, before I wrap it up, I just wanted to see if there were any questions. If not, okay. So, situation awareness is a process of seeing things, identifying things in the environment around you, processing that information, and then prognosticating or predicting what's going to happen in the future. We can actually develop behaviors that will enhance our situational awareness and critical procedures, and we can turn those behaviors into ingrained habits that are automatic when we initiate those procedures. So, if you guys are interested, This is a QR code that will lead you to the list of references, or you can check out this tinyurl.com/essay and resus, and that will also take you to a list of the references. Thank you guys very much for paying attention. I appreciate it.